Well, welcome to tonight's study, and this has been a really fun one for me to do. We're looking at James chapter 2, verses 1 to 13, and it it's really good for days like today. I mean, it's very contemporary to the very point that we see in conflict in our society about prejudice. And it's my opinion because, I've looked at this particular subject for a long, long time. Whether we're looking at skin color or, in my case, disability, there are many prejudices that are very difficult to overcome. And it isn't easy. If it was easy, it would have been done. In our own world, we were placed in a location that had a history of 300 years of slavery and getting closer to 200 years of still racism that relates to the slavery issue. And certainly a lot of people want to reset the dynamic in our country where opportunity for all can be done without skin color. I had always hoped it would happen in my lifetime, but I understand how difficult it is, to overcome. It's very difficult. Scripturally, I was thinking, how hard was it for Peter to overcome his prejudice against the Gentiles? We see the conflict in the book of Acts, chapter 10. It continues in chapter 11 and chapter 15 in Acts. And so much so that even Paul had to confront James related to his attitudes about Gentiles in Galatians chapter 2. Now, Peter surprisingly opened the door to have a ministry that would go to the whole world. And like the Old Testament character, I'm going to post the name up right now. I can't remember his name, but he, Barb, who's the fellow that sailed the boat to Nineveh? And it was Jonah. Okay, so sorry for that. But Jonah comes to mind. He had such a problem with God showing mercy on the Gentiles that it depressed him deeply. And I had a hard time remembering Jonah, but I knew the story. But it's a good story to read on relationship to how hard it is to deal with prejudice. And even though we may even do the right thing and open the door for it so that in the future many things can be done, we may go through a whole life of having that difficulty. For Peter, he became the apostle to the Jews, and Paul became the apostle to the Gentiles. I believe that Peter worked it out sufficiently by the time he gets to Rome and he has a ministry there before he is killed. I think he comes to grips with this in a much better way. But I think it took a while, and I think prejudice in general take a long time to overcome. But there's a freedom when we do, there's a freedom when we do. There's opportunity when we do. There is potential when we do. Um, you know, I just know in my own life when I worked against the grain, so to speak, and opened doors up for kids to do studies and other kind of approaches uh, in overcoming the barriers. And you just saw the kids really come to a greater appreciation in their studies, and they were growing leaps and bounds. It was just wonderful. But we got a long way to go, no doubt about that. Okay, and so James here is right to the point. Okay, right to the point. Now, prejudice, of course, stems from the Latin and emphasizes the prejudgment of someone, causing us an opinion before we know the facts. Once we race through our conclusions, ignoring the essential facts, we're well on our way to an irrational, insidious attitude that says, my mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts. And when we come to conclusions based upon preconceived ideas, oftentimes they won't fit. They will not fit the picture that we're trying to impress. The stereotype doesn't fit. And, you know, in history, of course, there were a lot of stereotypes. They went back and forth. You know, the Japanese had stereotypes of Americans, and Americans had stereotypes of the Japanese. And both these people fought a very bloody fight in the Pacific where they were confronting each other. And we learned that the Japanese really embraced a modern concept of the aircraft carriers. They saw that the real war was going to be done in the air, at sea, on the aircraft carriers. And they were sort of ahead of us on that. They had a very good light airplane that they made that was very, very fast and agile. And this plane, as long as it had a skilled pilot, was a very dangerous plane indeed. On the other hand, the Japanese felt that Americans would not have the stomach for a real fight, and they would not engage in one. They thought they were lazy and they were just pleasure seekers. And as it's been quoted from the Japanese admiral who planned Pearl Harbor, he understood that when what he felt he really did was he woke up the silent giant. And America, unprecedented really in history, prepared for war on two fronts, facing significant enemies. And while we went into these fights, particularly in the East, with prejudices, we sure learned that these guys really knew how to fight, and they were very capable enemies. We learned a lot. It's very interesting that, America opened the door to the Chinese developing their economy and their lives to where they were lifted up as one of the strongest economies in the world. So yeah, we as Americans, we have our faults, but we also have interesting successes. And but prejudice is a difficult thing. and it often affects people different ways. For myself, for example, I know I have prejudice, or I have, as a result of people looking at my disability, I have reactions that are overreactions, and that's affected my relationship with people, and I've had to deal with that. So there's many things that happen in prejudice, whether it's whoever, is involved. It affects us all. And so Peter here deals with this, okay? Now, we often forget that God looks at the heart. We look at the outside. When we look at the outside, we often make evaluations, and some of them are helpful, and others are misleading. And that's kind of where first impressions go. We can be fooled, Charles Swindoll points out, we can be fooled by people who are con artists. They look good, but they are, rotten at the core. On the other hand, we can be looking at somebody that, external-wise, doesn't seem like they have much going for them, and yet they are the ones who may have a lot of internal strengths and other kind of things that they have really going for them. They're strong in character, they're strong in body, they're strong in mind, and we might have missed it in our first impressions. And that's sort of what goes with first, impressions that we have. Now, here's the outline that James is having in this book, and I borrowed this again from Charles Swindoll. He's got a good one, so it's a good way to state it and help you know what's going on in this passage. James states his principle in James 2:1. James then provides a real-life illustration of that principle in verses 2 to 4. And then James supports it with reasons of that behavior, partiality, being inconsistent with an authentic Christian faith, verses 5 to 11. And finally, he ends with an exhortation to do what's right. Okay? Now, we definitely want to look at here. Okay. In our first paragraph, we read in verse 1, "My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality. For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings, in bright, fine apparel, and there should also come a poor man in vile, filthy clothes, and you look upon, pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and say to him, 'Sit here in this good place,' and you say to the poor man, 'You stand there,' or, more likely, 'Sit here at my footstool.' Have you not differentiated or shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts or motives?" Okay, so we have here, okay, in verse 1, first of all, we're not to show partiality. That's the principle. But this principle is stated in a strong affirmation of the deity of Christ. Who is the one that we are to value more important than any others? Isn't it God? Isn't it God? That's the one we should really hold to. And in particular, God has revealed himself through the Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. And, as many have said, this glory, Jesus Christ of glory, this Shekinah glory is on the Lord. That's our standard of who we're upholding. But to everybody else, we should be impartial. Okay, that's the premise of the principle. Now, he goes there and he shows us now an illustration of that principle. Okay, faith in Christ is not compatible to partiality. Okay, we are to be impartial. All right, literally, do not have. Now, notice here in verse 1, he's talking to Christians, my brothers and sisters, we could say today. Okay. For if one should come to your assembly, a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should also come a poor man in filthy clothes. It's important here that James is not saying there shouldn't be rich people, there shouldn't be poor people. He's just stating two different kinds of people here. Okay, it's not here, it's not saying any one of them is wrong. They should be both welcomed in the church of God. And you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say to him, you sit here in a good place. And you say to the poor man, you stand there or sit at my footstool. Okay, so here the usher is seating people. Now we have to look at, some examples of a synagogue. So first is my drawing that I reproduced myself from a drawing that was in the Swindoll study of James. And you can see where the women are. All right. They're up in the balcony along the side. And underneath them are the men sitting along the side in the synagogue. And the choice seat that Matthew talks about seems to be near where the pulpit is. And the seat where the fella is directed to is somewhere in the back where he's standing or sitting. But the guy with fine clothes, he is pushed up front and he has that particular seat. Now, we used to do this all the time in our churches. Many churches, if you go back in our colonial day, many of the churches, the people or the families used to buy the church pew that they sat in. And if they were a person of means, they sat in a place of prominence within this church. The poor people that would go to the church would be left with those seats that aren't paid for. Okay? And maybe some churches, they didn't have any non-paid seats. So they're standing in the back. All right. Now, we tend to sit a little differently today. Most churches that I've been to, the people tend to sit way in the back. Man, if they could get, a church that's real big and they're about 2 football fields back, that's about where they would sit. But in these days, people sat where the prominent people were. I think about funerals of people who die that people give significance to their death. Where do the celebrities sit? Usually they sit right up front. That even goes on today. So this usher here, he has been given this assignment, okay, to seat people, and he gives the guy a means, a good seat. And here you see some other synagogues here from Capernaum or from Masada, and on these locations, you'd have to be there, but you could almost see how they sit along the side. The balconies are long gone, and uh, so you can kind of figure where the good seats were and where people were placed in other locations. And so this usher here, he is deciding to sit this person in a good seat. Notice what it does here. It tells us that he's doing so with evil thoughts. Now, what is he looking at? Maybe if he gives this guy a good seat, then um, the the rich person is going to have a chance to give the guy a favor. All right, he will be remembered, and maybe he will get a good deal down the road. He's got some kind of motivation that may help him personally. That seems to be what's going on here. Now, does the church give those orders? In other words, does the leadership of the church give the orders to the ushers? This is where you sit people who are, the givers. This is where you seat the well-to-do. Make sure that they have good seats, Now, I'm not privy to that church's board meetings and to their leadership and how they decide these things. I can only tell you, being in the church that I have been in for so many years, that isn't exactly what we talk about at the board meeting. We used to have people sitting in the front when there was no longer any seats in the back. People were kind of forced to sit up closer because that's the only seats left. Different world. Anyway, but we didn't practice that type of seating. But do we confront this poor guy? Okay, I'm going to show you a chart here that we're going to look at today. And on the bottom there, you see James 2:8. And if you fulfill the law according to the scriptures, you shall love your neighbors yourself. You do well. But the context here of treating the poor is in verses 3 and 4. And the filthy clothes are more than just dirty, they smell. I mean, here, this particular problem hits you in the nostrils. Okay, can you smell them? They haven't taken a bath in a long, long time. They might be older and they have to wear diapers, or they smell, and they sit right next to you. Okay, now I'm telling you right now, you're going to have a test in your faith. Your nostrils are going to betray you. You're going to be thinking, oh, why does this person, should I tell them, oh man, they smell. And it's going to interrupt with your worship plan. All right. And I'm almost convinced next time you come into church, you're going to be very aware where the smelly person is, and you're going to make sure that you're not sitting next to that smelly person. So this is actually a lot more telling than you ever think. Now, does that smelly person need a bath or a shower? Maybe. Maybe they have a physical condition that causes smell. I'm telling you, the older you get, the more problems you run into. That kind of opens up a lot of things to you. But they have some kind of problem that's not only filthy, homeless, not unshaven, unclean, smelly. Um, it actually, yeah, you're going to be thinking about it. Okay, now maybe the person needs some help. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe we need to spend some time with them to see if there's any way we can help their situation get better. Maybe they need a place to stay. Maybe they need supplies. Maybe they need a sink, a bathtub, whatever. Something to help them along. Maybe they need a doctor. I don't know what the situation is, and I don't know how much of the needs we can meet, but if we start asking those kind of questions, we might be fulfilling the law here where it says you love your neighbors yourself. The test of loving our neighbors ourselves probably has more failure in our life than success, but we can learn to love our neighbor as ourselves. We have plenty of opportunities to do so. So I hope in this test that you make it your goal to pass it as God gives the opportunity.